There is a fruit sitting on my kitchen counter that weighs about half a pound. Cut it the long way, and the inside is the color of butter, soft enough to eat with a spoon, with 2 rows of dark seeds running down the middle, like beans laid in a pod. It tastes like a banana and a mango argued and settled somewhere in the middle. The texture is closer to custard than to anything you would call a fruit. The tree it came off is not in a greenhouse. It stands out in the open through snow, through ice storms, through the kind of February that splits fence posts, and it comes back every spring on its own. And you have almost certainly never seen it in a grocery store. Not because it is rare. It grows wild across half of this country. My name is Wendell. There are 2 of these at the bottom of my property, and the first one took me 9 years. So that is the question worth 28 minutes of your time. A fruit that tastes tropical, on a tree that takes a real winter, native to the ground under your feet, and nobody has one. Why? There are 4 answers. They are all different, and the last one is the one that actually explains it. It has nothing to do with taste and nothing to do with the weather. Let me tell you what it is first. It is the pawpaw, Asamina triloba. And the reason it tastes the way it does is written into its family tree. The pawpaw belongs to the Ananaceae, a family that is otherwise entirely tropical. Its cousins are the cherimoya, the soursop, the sugar apple, fruits that grow where frost never happens. The pawpaw is the one member of that family that pushed north, adapted, and stayed. So the flavor is not a coincidence or a marketing comparison. You are eating a tropical fruit. It simply learned to survive Ohio. Its native range is bigger than most people would guess. Oregon State University puts it from Ontario, north of Lake Erie, and New York, south to Florida, and west as far as Nebraska and Texas. That is not a specialty crop range. That is most of the eastern half of the country. The tree itself is modest, 15 to 20 feet in most yards, sometimes double that where conditions suit it. Broad leaves, close to a foot long, that hang down and give the whole tree a drooping, almost tropical look in summer. In fall, those leaves turn a clear yellow that is worth the space on its own. It grows naturally as an understory tree, in the shade of bigger trees along creek bottoms and river banks. Hold on to that detail. It comes back later, and it is the reason a lot of people kill their first one. And there is a fair chance one is growing within a few miles of where you are sitting. Pawpaws are common in the woods and almost invisible because unless the fruit is on the branch, it looks like a nondescript small tree with big leaves. Here is something that tells you how well known this fruit used to be. It collected names. Depending on where you are in the country, the same tree gets called the Indiana banana, the prairie banana, the poor man's banana, the custard apple, the Michigan banana. A plant does not accumulate half a dozen regional nicknames unless ordinary people were picking it, eating it, and talking about it often enough to need a word for it. Those names were not invented by botanists. They came out of kitchens and out of the woods. Which means this is not a fruit America never knew. It is a fruit America forgot, and it happened inside about 3 generations. Somewhere between the arrival of the refrigerated boxcar and the moment a banana from Central America became cheaper than a walk to the creek, the pawpaw stopped being food and became a curiosity. The trees never went anywhere. They are still standing in the same bottomland they were always in. We just stopped looking. That is what it is. Now let me be square with you about what it actually tastes like. I would rather you got the whole picture from me than buy one at a roadside stand and feel misled. The comparison people reach for first is banana. That is the base note, and it is the closest single thing. Layered on top of it is mango, sometimes melon, and in a really good one, something almost like vanilla custard. Ripe pawpaw is sweet, properly sweet, not fruit sweet. The texture is the part that surprises people. It is not firm. There is no crunch and no snap. It is soft the way a very ripe persimmon is soft, or a baked sweet potato. That is why the standard way to eat one is to cut it in half and go at it with a spoon. Now the part most videos leave out. Not everybody likes it. Some people find it too sweet, too rich, cloying after a few bites. It is not an apple you eat absently while you work. It is closer to a dessert, and a small one goes a long way. And an underripe pawpaw is genuinely unpleasant. It is astringent, it dries out your mouth, and it will put a person off the fruit for life. A ripe one gives slightly when you press it, the way a ripe peach does, and it comes off the branch with almost no pull. If you have to yank it, it is not ready. So that is the flavor and the honest limits of it. Which brings up the obvious question. If this is essentially a tropical fruit, how does the tree survive a winter that kills a peach? Oregon State rates it hardy to Zone 5 and describes it as the most cold-hardy species in its entire genus. Look back at that native range. Ontario and New York on the north edge. Those are not mild places. Ontario north of Lake Erie gets lake effect snow measured in feet. The mechanism is not exotic. The pawpaw is deciduous. It drops every leaf in fall and goes fully dormant, the same as an apple or a maple. And a dormant tree with no leaves has very little for the cold to damage. The tropical part of the pawpaw is the fruit and the family it belongs to. The habits are pure, temperate hardwood. What this means practically is that if you can grow apples where you live, you can almost certainly grow pawpaws. Zone 5 covers the upper Midwest, most of New England, a good deal of the northern plains. There is one caveat worth knowing if you are on the cold edge. The tree survives fine, but the fruit needs a long enough warm season to finish. In cooler regions, the answer is to choose early ripening varieties, and Oregon State names several by name for exactly that reason. The tree is not the limit. The calendar is. So the fruit is real. The hardiness is real. The range covers most of the country. Now, if any of this is new to you, that is the whole reason I make these. Subscribing costs nothing, and it is the only thing that keeps a channel like this one going. Do it now instead of at the end, because the 4 answers start here, and the last one is the one nobody says out loud. Here is the first answer to why nobody plants it, and it is not about gardeners at all. It is about trucks. A tree-ripened pawpaw has a shelf life of 3 to 5 days at room temperature. That number comes from the University of Kentucky's Center for Crop Diversification, from a crop profile by Cheryl Kaiser and Matt Ernst. Refrigeration stretches it to somewhere between 1 and 3 weeks, and Kentucky states plainly that this narrow window is what makes wide retail distribution impractical. Sit with that for a second and compare it to what is in your produce aisle. A banana is picked green in Central America, gassed to ripen on schedule, and survives weeks of handling. An apple can sit in controlled atmosphere storage for the better part of a year. Modern produce is not selected for flavor. It is selected for the ability to survive a supply chain. The pawpaw fails that test completely. The skin is thin. A ripe one bruises in your hand if you grip it wrong. There is no picking it green and ripening it later the way you can with a tomato. A pawpaw picked early stays astringent. So it never entered the system. And because it never entered the system, it never entered anybody's head. 2 or 3 generations of Americans grew up without ever encountering it. And a fruit nobody has tasted is a fruit nobody thinks to plant. That is the first answer. And notice, it has nothing to do with the tree being difficult. It is a logistics problem that turned into a memory problem. The second answer is about the tree, and this one is on us. One pawpaw tree will not give you fruit. Kentucky is direct about it. Pawpaws need cross-pollination between genetically different varieties. Not 2 trees, 2 different trees from different genetic stock. This trips people constantly and in ways that feel unfair. 2 saplings of the same named variety will not do it. They're clones of each other. 2 suckers off the same wild root will not do it either. A pawpaw spreads by root suckers, and a whole patch in the woods can be one single organism wearing 20 trunks. So a man plants a pawpaw, waits patiently for years, gets a beautiful, healthy tree, and not one fruit. He concludes the tree is barren, or the climate is wrong, or that everything he was told about pawpaws was nonsense. That was not on him. Nobody at the nursery mentioned it, and the tag on the pot rarely does. The fix is not complicated. Buy 2 and make sure they are 2 different named varieties. If you're starting from seed, seedlings are genetically distinct by nature, so 2 seedlings from different parent trees work fine. Plant them within about 30 feet of each other. That is the second answer, which would be the end of it, except 2 trees is still not always enough. The third answer is the strangest thing about this plant, and it is the reason hobby growers with 2 proper trees still come up empty. The pawpaw is not pollinated by bees. Its flowers are deep maroon, almost brown, and they hang downward. They do not smell sweet. They give off a faint scent of fermenting or rotting matter, and that is deliberate on the tree's part, because the pollinators it evolved alongside are flies and beetles. Kentucky's assessment of that arrangement is blunt. Flies and beetles are thought to be the pollinators, but since they are neither efficient nor dependable, hand pollination can be helpful. Neither efficient nor dependable. That is a university extension office telling you the tree's own reproductive strategy is unreliable. So the practical answer is that you become the pollinator. It takes a small, soft brush and about 2 minutes per tree. The flowers open over a stretch of weeks in spring, and the timing inside a single flower matters. The female parts mature before the pollen does on the same flower, which is the tree's way of preventing self-pollination. So you take pollen from a flower on tree A that has ripe, loose pollen on it, and you brush it onto a flower on tree B whose center still looks glossy and fresh. Then reverse the direction and do it again. Do a dozen flowers, not 1. Set fruit is heavy and the branches are not, and a tree that sets too much will drop some anyway. Some old growers hang something foul near the trees during bloom to draw more flies. I have never done it, and I am not going to recommend hanging spoiled meat in a yard people walk through. The brush works and it costs nothing. So those are 3 answers, and every one of them is solvable, which means the tree is worth having. So let me get to the part where you actually get one, because this is where most first attempts die. There is one rule that matters more than everything else in this section, and it comes straight out of the Kentucky profile. Wild collected and field-grown pawpaw trees transplant poorly because the taproot is delicate. Container-grown nursery trees transplant quite well. That difference decides whether your tree lives. A pawpaw puts down a deep taproot early, before it does much of anything above ground. Damage that root and the tree either dies outright or sits there for years refusing to grow. And you cannot see the damage. You dig up what looks like a fine little tree, plant it properly, water it faithfully, and watch it fail for reasons that never become visible. So here is the rule. Buy container grown from a nursery in a pot, not bare root, not dug from the woods. And I want to say that second part plainly because it is the single most common way people try this. Somebody finds a pawpaw patch on a walk, sees a knee-high sapling, and takes it home. That sapling is almost certainly a root sucker off the parent tree, which means two things at once. Its taproot is already compromised, and it is a genetic clone of everything else in that patch, so it will never pollinate with its neighbors anyway. Two failures in one shovel. Seed is the other route, and it is legitimate with one hard rule. Pawpaw seed must never dry out. Let it sit on a counter and it is dead with no outward sign. Seed goes from the fruit into damp material and into cold storage, and it needs a couple of months of cold before it will germinate at all. Seed is cheap and gives you genetic variety for free. It also costs you years, which is the fourth answer, and I am nearly there. When you plant, dig wide rather than deep. Keep the crown level with the surrounding ground. Water it in slowly and mulch a couple of inches while keeping the mulch off the trunk. Now, having bought the right tree and planted it correctly, there is one more way to lose it in the first summer, and it catches almost everybody. It caught me. Remember that a pawpaw grows naturally in the understory, in shade, under bigger trees. A young pawpaw cannot take full sun. Kentucky's guidance is specific. Trees under about 1.5 feet tall should be shaded through the first year with tree guards or shelters. In open ground, unshaded, a first-year pawpaw in July sun will scorch. The leaf edges brown, then the whole leaf, and a small tree that loses its leaves in its first summer usually does not come back. This is backwards from everything else you plant, and that is exactly why people get it wrong. Every instinct says a fruit tree wants full sun, and it does, eventually. A mature pawpaw fruits best in full sun. It is only the first year or two, while it is still a seedling in the shade in its own mind, that it needs protection. A tree shelter from a nursery handles it. So does shade cloth on the south side, or a board propped to throw afternoon shade, or planting it deliberately on the east side of something taller so it gets morning sun and afternoon shelter. By year 2 or 3, it will tell you it is ready by simply not scorching anymore. Then it wants all the sun it can get. So, right tree, planted right, shaded through the first summer, which leaves the only question anybody actually wants answered. How long until you eat one? Kentucky gives the numbers. A grafted tree bears 3 to 4 years after planting, with full crops by about year 5. A seedling bears in 5 to 8 years. Read that again, because it is the fourth answer to the question in the title, and it is the real. Nobody plants pawpaws because a pawpaw does not pay off in a season. Everything else we have covered has a fix. The shipping problem is not your problem. You are eating it in your own yard. The pollination problem is solved by buying 2. The pollinator problem is solved with a brush. The shade problem is solved with a piece of cloth. The time cannot be solved. It is 5 years minimum from a grafted tree and closer to 8 from seed. And now think about it from the other side of the counter. A nursery lives on trees that satisfy a customer this season. A tomato plant delivers in 8 weeks. A dwarf apple bears in 2 or 3 years. Nobody builds a business on a tree the buyer will not judge for half a decade. So nurseries do not stock it. So garden centers do not display it. So it never gets in front of anyone. That is the whole thing. Not the taste, not the winner, not the difficulty. The pawpaw is a fine tree that fails a business model, and it has been quietly waiting in the woods the entire time, which is a good reason for somebody with a yard to plant one. You are not running a nursery. You are not selling anything. 5 years is nothing at all, when the alternative is 5 years passing anyway with no tree in the ground. So let me tell you what that fifth autumn actually looks like, because knowing how to pick one matters as much as growing it. Pawpaws ripen from late summer into fall, and the exact weeks depend on where you are and which variety you planted. What does not change is how the tree tells you. A ripe pawpaw comes off in your hand. Cup it, lift it slightly, and give the smallest twist. If it releases, it was ready. If you have to pull, walk away and come back in 3 days. That one rule will save you more disappointment than anything else, because an underripe pawpaw is the astringent, mouth-drying thing I warned you about, and people who taste that one first never try a second. The second signal is smell. A ripe tree announces itself. Stand under it, and the air is sweet and slightly fermented, and you will smell it before you see anything. The third is the ground. Ripe fruit drops on its own, and a pawpaw that has fallen onto soft ground within the last day is usually perfect. Check underneath before you check the branches. Raccoons and possums work the same schedule you do, and they start earlier in the morning. Color is the least reliable signal, which trips people up. The skin goes from green toward yellow and picks up brown blotches as it ripens, and those blotches look like spoilage to anybody used to supermarket produce. A blotchy, slightly soft pawpaw is at its best. A perfectly smooth green one is not ready. And once you have picked them, you run straight into the problem we talked about earlier. 3 to 5 days on the counter, and a mature tree does not hand you 3 fruits. It hands you an armload, all in the same fortnight. The answer is the freezer, and it is the reason a home grower beats the supply chain that gave up on this fruit. You do not freeze pawpaws whole. Cut them, scoop the pulp out with a spoon, and pick out every seed. It goes faster than it sounds. The pulp is soft, and the seeds are large and slippery, so they come away easily. Some people push the pulp through a colander to be thorough. Then, pack the pulp into containers or bags in usable portions. Press the air out and freeze it. It keeps for months, and it thaws back to something very close to fresh because there is no fiber structure to collapse the way there is in a strawberry. Frozen pawpaw pulp is what most people actually use. It goes into quick bread almost exactly the way mashed banana does. It makes ice cream that tastes like nothing else you can buy. Stirred into yogurt, it needs no sweetener at all. So the 3-day shelf life that killed this fruit commercially is not a problem in your kitchen. It is a problem for a truck. You are 20 feet from the tree with a spoon and a freezer, and that changes the entire equation. Before I tell you how I would actually start, there is one thing I need to cover, and I would rather you got it from me than from a search at midnight after you have eaten 4 of them. Pawpaw contains compounds called acetogenins. The two that get named most often are anonicin and squamacin, and both are neurotoxins. Here is what is actually known. The acetogenins are concentrated in the bark, the roots, the twigs, and the seeds. There are also some in the pulp, and unripe fruit carries more activity than ripe fruit. A study from 2020 found the combined anonicin and squamacin levels in pawpaw higher than in any of the other fruits it looked at. There have been reports linking pawpaw to Parkinsonism. What there has not been is solid clinical casework, and the honest summary is that the question is open rather than settled. Nobody has established a safe dose because the trials to establish one have not been done. So here is how I treat it, and this is my own line, not a medical recommendation. Ripe pulp only. Not the skin, not the seeds. Never crack a seed, never eat one, and do not let a child treat them like sunflower seeds. Spit them out. Eat it the way you would eat a rich dessert, which is what it is. A pawpaw or 2 in a sitting in the weeks they are ripe. Not a bucket, not every day for a month because the tree came in heavy. Do not eat underripe fruit, which you would not want to anyway. And if you are pregnant or nursing, skip it. That is the standard guidance where compounds have unresolved questions and no established dose, and it costs you 1 season. I am not telling you this to talk you out of the tree. I have 2 of them, and I eat what they give me. I am telling you because a video that sells you on a fruit and leaves out the one thing you would want to know is not worth watching. You would have found it eventually anyway. So here is how I would start, in order. Buy 2 trees in containers of 2 different named varieties. That single sentence solves the 2 most common failures at once: the transplant problem and the pollination problem. And it costs nothing extra over doing it wrong. Put them 30 feet apart or less, somewhere with decent drainage and deep soil. Shade them through the first summer and take the shelter off in year 2. On the 3rd spring, when the maroon flowers open, take 20 minutes and a soft brush and move pollen from one tree to the other and back. That is the whole job for the year. Then wait. That is the part I cannot make easier, and it is the part that has kept this fruit out of American yards for a century. Tell me in the comments whether there are pawpaws growing wild near you and what state you are in. I suspect a fair number of you have walked past them and never looked up. I would be grateful if you subscribe to the channel. New videos go up every day. See you next time, friends.